Hello there, people of the internet. I've heard this a couple of times since I, run a gun channel and I show off all sorts of different firearms. I've had people tell me that 3030, which is what we have right here on the screen, they tell me that this cartridge has taken the most deer out of every other cartridge here inside the United States. I'm not sure how well this statement would hold up in other parts of the world, but I do know that whenever I'm being told this, it's typically an American telling me this. Now, granted, no one has been able to back up this information. They don't have any real way to tell me for a fact that the 3030 has taken the most deer out of everything. They mostly just tell me that they heard it from a friend, who heard it from a friend, who heard it from a friend. There are a lot of people out there who tell me that it's basically just completely FUD lore. And I'm inclined to agree with that. I don't think that the 3030 has taken the most deer out of everything, and we'll go ahead and we'll talk about that later in the video because I do have a couple of points that I want to point out with that particular topic. But before we get started, I am going to say if you like this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. I got a couple of 8mm Mausers up here from a previous recording. They're just kind of side pieces in this video, I guess. So the 3030 Winchester was kind of set up for success. And a lot of that has to do with the platform that the 3030 Winchester ended up being used through. In the 1800s, lever actions were extremely popular here inside the United States. Way more popular than basically any other kind of rifle design besides maybe breech loading systems. And that's because lever actions during a vast majority of their lifespan in the 1800s just were not strong enough to withstand the pressures generated by large caliber, large cartridges. Now, that was not entirely the case in the entirety of the 1800s, but for a good majority of the lever action lifespan in the 1800s, you basically had lower powered cartridges. I know the 1860 Henrys started off with 44 Henry rimfire, which was kind of an anemic cartridge even for back then. And then it got bumped up to 4440, and then you kind of saw a whole influx of all sorts of different things. In 1876, Winchester ended up launching a rifle that kind of had the old style of lever action design, but with a more powerful cartridge, but not as powerful as they were going to get to. In 1886, I think, they ended up adding locking lugs to their system, which greatly increased strength, and that allowed for more powerful cartridges. In 1894, this was whenever the 3030 was introduced. It was 30 Winchester centerfire back then, and it was the first commercially available smokeless powder round. Now, that gives us, 130 years or so of this cartridge being around. It also gives us, on top of, the length of the cartridge, the length of the lifespan of the cartridge, it also gives us the length of the lifespan of the firearms design that the cartridge fired through. So we have an old school, very well known, very popular rifle design, along with, especially by today's standard, an old school cartridge that's been around for a very, very long time. The cartridge is light hitting, light recoiling. It is effective out at distances that most people would be hunting at. If you're hunting beyond like 300 yards or so, you're definitely not you're definitely not among the majority of people, because the majority of people can't hit anything beyond like 100 yards or so. Ask me how I know. I've seen plenty of people out at plenty of gun ranges who can't even hit things at 50 yards. So, yeah, the 3030 Winchester has definitely served its purpose for what it is as a cartridge. Now, has it taken the most deer in comparison to some other cartridges? I will say no. However, I will say that just because of the longevity of the cartridge and the popularity of the cartridge for as long as it has been around, leaves it to that plausible deniability of perhaps it has. There is a possibility that the 3030 Winchester has, just because with its creation in the 1890s, it was very, 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 very popular here in the United States up until like the 1980s or so. This was the go-to cartridge inside the United States, besides a couple others that we will touch on, for a very, very long time, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that Americans love lever-action rifles, or at least we did, up until the time period where we started really getting into civilian self-loading firearms. After World War II, there were a lot of bolt actions that came onto the civilian market here inside the United States, but a lot of them were kind of seen as cheap, not that great, subpar. It wasn't until real recently where I use the term real recently because we're talking about centuries here. It wasn't until like relatively recently that these bolt-action military surplus rifles were seen as better than what they have been seen as before, and that's kind of what really spiked in interest with a lot of these. Now, the 30-30 definitely popular in the United States for a very long time, but I do have to point out the 30-06. The 30-06 was made only 15 years, if memory serves me correctly. 15 years or so after the 30-30 Winchester. However, for a very long time, firearms that fired the 30-06, unless you were talking about military-style firearms, the civilian citizenship in the United States just did not really utilize bolt-action rifles all that much. Basically, for a long, long time, people were leaning towards lever actions. Basically, up until the Second World War. It wasn't until after the Second World War where we started to really see influxes of large amounts of bolt-action rifles because of that surplus, and that's where the bolt-action rifle really started to take off here in the United States in terms of civilian ownership. However, even after World War II, lever-action rifles were still overwhelmingly popular for a very, very long time. I know of several people that are, they were around in the 70s and the 80s, and lever-action guns were just the guns to have. People that grew up in those time periods, if they were gun people, odds are they had a 30-30 lever action of some kind, and there's no guarantee that they had a 30-06 of some kind. Now, nowadays, 30-06 is extremely popular. I think it gained popularity in the 80s or so. So any of my viewers that are watching, if you were around in, say, the 70s or earlier, and you had a bolt action chambered in 30-06, let me know what you had, where you got it, and why it is that you got it. That would be good information to have for this particular video. Now, I have had a couple of people tell me that something like 308 has taken a tremendous amount of deer, and you know what? I am inclined to believe you on that one. However, the 308 came out in 1957, if memory serves me correctly. So the 30-06 and the 30-30 have some significant longevity over this cartridge. Not only that, but by the time that this cartridge came out, a vast majority of people in the United States were no longer hunting food for survival purposes like they would have back in the 1890s with the inception of the 30-30. Now, this right here was a cartridge that was designed after World War II, and it was designed for essentially logistical simplicity between different countries out there. I'm trying to pick my wording here because I know that some people are quite sensitive on these kinds of topics. But there was essentially made for standardization between cartridges between countries. So I don't believe that 30-30 has taken the most deer out of every other cartridge. I think that 30-06 would probably give it a real significant run for its money. But I also very, very much believe that 30-30 has taken a lot of deer to the point to where there is that possibility where this myth that just kind of roams around is it's possible. It's possible to the point to where whenever people say it and they hear it, they believe it just because of the longevity of the cartridge and the history of the cartridge. Now, that all being said, I do want to show this right here, and I think this right here is a representation of a cartridge that has taken, like, the most deer out of all times. Now, this right here is double-aught buckshot. And if we look inside there, we can see round balls. Round ball and buckshot and basically the simplistic style of this type of ammunition, not necessarily this 12-gauge shotgun shell, but buckshot and round ball and things like that, those have been used for hundreds of years before any of this began to exist. Cartridge technology didn't really become a thing. It was around, but it didn't really become a thing until the United States Civil War, and that was the 1860s whenever that started. So yeah, we have the 1860s and centuries, like before the United States even existed, worth of centuries before that, of people in this area using round ball and buckshot to take out deer. I think that these little guys right here, by a wide margin, have taken more deer than the 30-30 Winchester, just because of the longevity. This cartridge is 125 or 130, somewhere around there, years old, but round ball has been around for a very, very, very long time. We're talking literally hundreds and hundreds of years, and it is still taking deer to this day. Granted, nowadays it's not nearly as popular as some of these other cartridges whenever it comes to taking deer, but the centuries of people taking deer to survive back in the day, that just leaves me to believe that those round balls and buckshot and whatnot are dramatically more responsible for the loss of deer live than any of our modern metallic cartridges. And I use that term lightly because whenever I say modern metallic cartridges, I'm referring to all of the metallic cartridges that were made 1860 and later. And if we're just talking about metallic cartridges, I do want to point out that 22 Long Rifle has taken a tremendous amount of deer just from poaching and from people. I don't really want to go deep into this topic because it is kind of a sensitive topic whenever it comes to the hunting community. I'm sure that some hunters are going to watch this since it's kind of a deer hunting based video. But 22 Long Rifle has been used to take out deer. That is a fact, whether we like it or not, whether we think it's morally correct or not. It has been used to take out deer in the modern day and for many, many, many years prior. I think that 22 Long Rifle in its modern form came out in the early 1900s, but I know that earlier forms of the cartridge existed before that, to the point to where I think the earliest version of 22 came out in 1835 as kind of a parlor cartridge. I don't foresee that particular parlor cartridge going out and taking deer, but I'm sure that at some point somebody had some modification of that cartridge and they were hungry and needed to go out and get themselves something to eat, and we've only seen deer taken by 22 for a tremendous amount of time, and it continues to still happen even to this day. 30-30 Winchester has definitely fallen out of favor in terms of the general population here in the U.S. However, there are still plenty of places here in the U.S. where 30-30 Winchester is definitely still one of the more popular cartridges. A lot of it is places where people are kind of still, I don't want to say living in the past, but they're still utilizing these older kinds of technology because they still work for their purposes. A lot of times whenever people are using 30-30, they're using it because their family already has a 30-30 rifle, and there's no point in going out and getting yourself some new hot technology whenever you already have the 30-30 and it already serves you well. However, with the modern manufacturing we have nowadays, and with the ability to get a very, very, very excellent modern firearm for not a lot of money, there's really, really, really good reasons to move up in terms of technological capabilities. But it does not matter if you continue to use the 30-30. I still say, in my own personal opinion, that round ball has taken more deer than absolutely anything out there cartridge related. So that's my 2 cents on the subject. I wanted to go ahead and make this video just because of, well, I've heard this repeated a lot. Like a lot of a lot. And with this being constantly said, I wanted to go ahead and throw my 2 cents in because guess what? I feel like this right here, round ball, has taken just way, 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 way more deer than anything that we debate about nowadays. Now, if we're talking about just things that have taken deer, then I will gladly set aside this round ball and we'll go ahead and we'll start talking about bows and arrows, because that has been around for literal millennias, taking out deer populations all around the world. So that I'd have to give, I'd have to give that I'd have to give that the winning spot in terms of things that have taken out deer here, in not just the United States but the planet. Now, the United States, if we're talking about just its existence, the United States existed after gun technology had already existed. So there's no guarantee. I know that we had Native Americans and whatnot here using bows and arrows for a very, very, very long time. But if we're talking about just in the time of the United States existing, we showed up and declared our independence in 1776, and firearms technology was already very well established by the time that that happened. So I'd still have to give it to Roundball here in the United States, if we're talking about just the existence of the U.S. and the time from 1776 to modern day. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. This video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to go ahead and edit here. And I reckon I will see you guys on the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.